Welcome to the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Edufaith Essentials is an educational podcast that provides essential information, resources, and tips about education, leadership, and topics about diverse learners. Diverse learners include students with disabilities who receive services under Section 504 or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, response to intervention and the multi-tiered system of support, English speakers of other languages, and related diverse learner categories. Edufaith Essentials' mission is to bring positive awareness and promote equity and inclusion in education by sharing information and topics about non-traditional learners. Edufaith Essentials' goal is to restore faith in education one student at a time by empowering listeners with knowledge, because we all know that knowledge is power, so let's be powerful. I am your host, Dr. Nakia, sending you good vibes and thanking you for joining me for another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Let's go ahead and dive into our Edufaith inspirational story. There is a new student-run business in Palo Heights, Illinois. The store, named I-5 Heights, is an extension of the Adult Transition Program in Oaklawn, and it allows special needs students to train and work at the store, preparing them for their future. The store sells custom clothing, seasonal decor, and more, all created by the students and the graduates. The store opened back in December 2023 and has stayed busy. The school district said merchandise that the students make tends to fly off the shelves. The program serves young adults from ages 18 to 21 with special needs from Eisenhower, Richards, and Shepherd High Schools. The Special Services Director says it's an opportunity for us to display our students' creativity and their special skills. She also mentions that it's an extension of the classroom, the real world, which benefits our students and the community. The student workers are enjoying their jobs, and if you go by the store, you are guaranteed to get a high five as you enter and exit the store. The school district said the store is federally funded and all proceeds go directly back into the program. To find out more information, I will have the link on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. And this is a great story and a wonderful way to start off our year in 2024 with a little inspiration. Now let's shift to some dates to remember for the month of February. February is Black History Month. This is a time to honor the contributions and sacrifices of African Americans who helped shape the United States. The theme for this year's Black History Month is African Americans and the Arts. February is also Career and Technical Education Month, Financial Aid Awareness Month, and Dental Health Month. When we look at specific dates during the month of February, February 2nd is Groundhog Day. February 5th is National School Counseling Week, which is February 5th to the 9th, where we recognize the wonderful contributions and recognize our professional school counselors. February 14th is Valentine's Day, a day to share love and give love. February 14th is also Congenital Heart Defect Awareness Day and National Donor Day. February 15th is National School Officer Appreciation Day, a day to recognize our wonderful school resource officers and how they keep us safe in our schools. February is also International Childhood Cancer Day globally. February 17th is Random Acts of Kindness Day, where we're sharing kindness all over to those around us. February 19th is President's Day, where we recognize our presidents and the birthdays of some of our founding presidents. February 20th is World Day of Social Justice, which is a global day. February 27th to March 5th is Eating Disorder Awareness Week. I want to encourage you to go to www.edufaithconsulting.com and subscribe to the monthly newsletter. Edufaith now has a monthly newsletter that I send to my subscribers every month, which has valuable information, an overview of the happenings of Edufaith Consulting, essential tips for parents, leaders, and educators, as well as all of the dates to remember for you in the monthly newsletter. So subscribe to www.edufaithconsulting.com and get essential. Now let's shift to our essential news and our dates to remember. Edufaith is presenting at the Council for Exceptional Children's Conference. I will be presenting on March 14th from 11:45 to 12:30. That session, I will be presenting essential tips for special education leaders, And then on that same day, March 14th, from 1 o'clock to 1:45, I will be presenting essential tips for Section 504 coordinators. I'm excited to be presenting my resources and my books at the Council of Exceptional Children's Conference. And that conference is for educators, leaders, and parents. It will be in San Antonio from March 13th through the 16th, but I will be presenting on the 14th. That is my essential news, and I hope to see you in San Antonio. Now let's go ahead and dive into our essential knowledge and our topic for today. As it is now February, we are now shifting into the second month of the year. And a lot of times we see a new year as a fresh start, a time to start over and see how we want to better ourselves. With that said, I wanted to do a little research and talk about resolutions. And here's what research said about resolutions. According to Drive Research, an article by Allen in 2023, it stated that 38% of adults will make a New Year's resolution, yours truly included. Of that group, 86% of men feel confident they'll stick to their resolutions, while 79% of women feel sure about it. Nearly 40% of Gen Zers felt pressured to make resolutions in the first place. 35% of men felt more pressure of those Gen Zers than the 28% of the women in making New Year's resolutions. Parents, 54% of parents made New Year's resolutions. And with that, parents wanted to instill this tradition in their children so they can work on making those resolutions together. When we look at the outcome of making resolutions, 12% of individuals stick with their goals or their resolutions throughout the year, with over 52% of those individuals feeling confident that they will meet their New Year's resolution. 77% of adults try to keep themselves accountable when sticking with the resolution, and 46% of adults are sticking with their resolutions after 6 months. I wanted to look at a little bit more information and look at how does resolutions and goal setting come into this? Is it better to set a resolution or is it better to set a goal? Based on Genesis Recovery, this is the research I found about goal setting and how goal setting will be a little bit more powerful than resolutions. Resolutions are often overly ambitious and they aim for drastic changes that are difficult to achieve. Goals, on the other hand, can be tailored to a small or a big change and can be either short or long term. So, this is one reason why goal setting might be a little bit better than resolutions. While resolutions are centered on reaching an end goal, goals are more towards the journey in achieving a desired outcome in the end. Resolutions tend to have a wide gap between the current situation and the desired outcome, but goals help bridge that gap by focusing on practical steps required to reach the intended result. Goals, on the other hand, are all about the how, which involves intentional setting, goal setting, planning, preparing, and taking actions. In contrast, resolutions are only focused on achieving the act or the feat rather than the effort required to accomplish the objective and the outcome. So, goals are more about the steps, the planning, and how you're going to reach the resolution, whereas the resolution is the end with no planning in the middle. Goals are essential for making resolutions feasible, and they can help you achieve your desired outcomes with confidence. So instead of making New Year's resolutions, we're going to talk about some goals for 2024. To start, we're going to look at some long term visions, and then we're going to set some goals and then align that with the vision. So, to avoid putting pressure on yourself by trying to meet a resolution or an outcome without a plan, let's look into setting some goals and not setting strict timelines, which can lead to increased stress. It's important to use the term vision and have a vision, and then have some checkpoints along the way with some goals to how you're going to accomplish your overall vision. My recommendation, and what I've started to do, because resolutions left my vocabulary a couple of years ago because I was tired of being a failure. My recommendation is to have a long-term vision and maybe set 3 goals for this year and work towards those goals throughout the year to make those goals into practice, into your vision. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to set some goals and talk about essential tips and goals for parents of students with disabilities, essential tips and goals for educators who work with students with disabilities and diverse learners, and then some essential tips and goals for our leaders. And that's going to be what we talk about today in our podcast, setting some goals instead of resolutions, setting a vision, and coming up with 3 goals. When we look at goals, one thing I want to talk about is something called SMART goals. And SMART goals are goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So when we set a SMART goal, we want to make sure that your goal is clear, it's well-defined, and you know exactly what you want to achieve. It should be quantifiable too, so you can track your progress and see how far you've come. So say you want to do a weight loss goal. You weigh yourself in January, you set some goals, and then you make those goals specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. When you set that goal, you look at yourself and maybe track your weight in February, track your weight in March, track your progress every month to see how you're doing and what changes you need to make to reach those goals. And let's just talk a little bit about SMART goals. You want to make sure that you're setting the goal. You want to make sure it's clear and well defined, and you know exactly what you want to do to achieve it. Your goal should be achievable and realistic. And then think about the steps that you want to take to get there and make sure that those steps are doable. So I have a couple of goals for health, and I also have some goals for Edufaith this year. And I've already set some plans in motion on how I want to expand and grow Edufaith. And I want to have some specific time stamps that I'm going to go back in time and see how those goals are doing and if I need to realign those goals. You want to make sure your goal matters to you and it fits into your values and your other goals. So it should be something that excites you and motivates you. It's a new year. What am I going to do different as a parent of a child with a disability? It's a new year. What am I going to do as an educator to influence my students? It's a new year. What am I going to do as a leader to make sure that I include and have a positive, inclusive environment and drastically change some things over time to help support my vision in my school building? You want to look at those things. You want to make sure that those goals are achievable and realistic. You want to make sure that your goals matter and they fit with your goals and values. And it should be something that you're excited to do because you're motivated, because this is something that you're excited to accomplish. Finally, you want to give yourself a deadline to work towards. I mentioned this a few minutes ago. You want to look at when I'm going to have some checkpoints to see how the goal is maintaining. Then I want to see when I'm going to meet this goal, because once you meet a goal, whether it's long-term or short-term, you're always excited to have that feeling of accomplishment when you're trying to meet the goal. We want to make sure that we have those SMART goals, and we can always have resolutions, but I feel like it's just a little bit better. This is my essential tip. Is better to set some goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely versus a resolution with no plan in place. Now we're going to look at essential tips for educators. And it's not just for special educators, it's for educators across the board. The first thing we want to do with educators as you start your new year and you're thinking about how you're going to support your students, you want to set thoughtful and achievable goals for working with your students with special needs, disabilities, exceptionalities, and diverse learners. So here are some goals for you educators as you dive into your new year and see how am I going to start 2024 fresh and how I'm going to meet the needs of my students. Here's some strategies. We're going to start with instructional strategies. And from all these goals and strategies I'm giving you, I want you to think about all of these things and develop goals for yourself for you to move forward. And then, like I said, have some checkpoints for you to go in and check yourself and see how you're doing. As you start your new year, teachers, the first instructional strategy I want to encourage you to do is review your students' individual education plans and your 504 plans. So go to the case managers, go to your 504 coordinators, make sure you have updated copies of those students' plans in your classroom, and make sure that those plans are current and they're relevant and they're aligned with your students' progress and their ability, because now you've had a whole semester to work with your students. And you want to make sure that you're following those accommodations and communicating with the case managers and the coordinators to see if we need to change any goals or make any changes. You're collaborating if you're a gen ed teacher, you're collaborating with the special education teachers. And if you are a 504 coordinator, you're collaborating with the teachers as well to make sure that you have the most current plan, updated information, and that as you are an educator, that you're aligning your instructional practices and processes to provide those accommodations to help meet that child's IEP goals or the Section 504 accommodations. The second thing that you want to do is make sure that you're differentiating your instruction educators. You want to explore and implement various teaching strategies that cater to the diverse students' learning styles within the general education or special education classrooms. So take a look at the data that you have mid-year now, because we're in the middle of the year, and see how you may need to shift your groups, if you have groups in your class, or how you need to differentiate your learning to differentiate instruction to meet the unique needs of your students now that you've had them for a few months and you've seen their 504 plans or their IEPs and you've seen what type of learners they are. Do you need to provide more kinesthetic instruction? Do you need to provide more visual instruction? You need to provide more hearing, auditory processing, auditory instruction for your students. So what type of learning styles is going to be more appropriate? And how do I need to differentiate instruction for my students and develop groups and plans to provide that instruction to meet my students' diverse learning needs? The third one is professional development. What workshops you need to attend workshops, conferences, and training sessions. And you want to see, now that you know your students and you see their needs, what do you need to work on as an educator to make sure that you're providing the most updated, differentiated instruction and new teaching techniques and technologies to stay informed and provide the most valuable instruction for your student. So as an educator, you always want to learn and grow, but during this time, take some time to set some goals for some professional development and some things that you want to attend, and some workshop and training and conferences, or even district support to help you work with your students as you set goals for this year. How are you collaborating with your support staff? You want to make sure that you're fostering those strong communication and collaboration with your aides and your paraprofessionals, your therapists, and your other support staff within your building. So are you communicating with the 504 coordinators? Do you have a great relationship with the case managers who are writing IEPs? Are you attending those IEP meetings and providing your content, valuable background, and expertise on curriculum? How are you working together to create a cohesive and supportive learning environment? So think about those things and decide what goals you want to set to align with that. I mentioned this earlier, but when you're looking at your goals and things you want to set in contests, look at your data collection and analysis. So how are you consistently collecting data? How are you analyzing data? Do you need to go back to the drawing board and change some things? But how are you using data to drive your instruction and adjust your instructional strategies and set new goals and insights with your parents and your support teams that you're collaborating with? So as an educator, data is very important. So during this time, as you set goals, remember that you want to set some goals on how you're collecting data, analyzing data, and differentiating instruction to help support your learning needs. How are you incorporating technology? So at this time of the year, how are you going to look at exploring and integrating technology tools and apps to enhance the learning experience for students? And what assistive technology or apps really work with your student in assessing their needs and providing that feedback for you to target and tailor your instruction for your students' needs? You want to make sure that if you need additional professional development training, or if there's something new, set some goals on how you want to align that all up or to flow for the new year for your students. Next one is cultivating an inclusive learning environment. How are you going to foster a sense of inclusion and acceptance within your classroom? Are you going to encourage more peer support this year that your kids, now that they know each other? Are you going to educate the whole entire class about diversity and different abilities? How are you going to ensure that you are continuing to shift and make your classroom an inclusive learning environment throughout the year? Take some time, reflect, and think about what goals you can do to target that thing. And then finally, two more things: communication with parents. Are you still communicating with parents? Do you need to readjust your strategies and the ways you are communicating with parents? Have you established and maintained open lines of communication throughout the first semester? Is there anything you need to adjust for the second semester? Have you scheduled regular conferences? Do you have time, or are you communicating with parents about student progress, addressing concerns, and collaborating on strategies for support? Another thing you want to look at too as you start the new year is behavior management. A lot of times when we start the new year, we want to look at changing some rules and some consequences. We're looking at and making sure that we have implemented effective behavior management strategies that are tailored to your students' needs. Students change from September to January. So sometimes you may have to add some rules, or sometimes you may have to readjust some rules because kids may mature and change throughout the year. So make sure that your behavior management is still intact. And if it's not, what do you need to shift or what adjustments you need to make sure that your behavior management strategies and positive enforcement strategies are implemented within the classroom and aligned as you set goals for the new year and ways you're going to work with your students. So just instructional strategies for teachers. Let me recap. Review IEP and 504 plans. Make sure that you're differentiating instruction. Make sure that you have professional development plans, collaborating with the support staff, making sure that you have those strong communication and collaboration with support staff, that you're using data and data collection and analysis, incorporating technology, making sure that you manage behavior and you cultivating an inclusive environment for your students. So based on those things, think about some goals that you want to set for this year to help align some of those things going forward in the new year. The next category for educators is your own self-reflection and professional growth. So these are I gave the instructional strategies and ways that you're going to target instruction and decide what goals you want to make as an educator to align with your instructional practices for the new year. Now let's see how you're going to grow personally and professionally as an educator. Well, I mentioned professional development earlier with instructional strategies, but also you want to engage in self-reflection and assess your teaching outcomes, your models, and your personal growth. So how have I grown from the beginning of the semester, and what goal can I set now that I'm at this point of the school year? So what personal growth things I'm going to do this year to improve my teaching practices? How am I going to embrace adaptability and flexibility in teaching methods and classroom structure? Adjusting your plans? Are you evolving what your students need? So as you look into your personal growth, you want to self-reflect, you want to assess your teaching methods and outcome and set some professional development goals for improvement, and then embrace your flexibility and adaptability with the teaching methods. So as your students grow over time, how are you adjusting your instruction to meet their needs for a second semester? The third one is fostering independence in your students by gradually providing opportunities for them to take on more responsibility for their learning and encouraging self-advocacy skills. So as you're working through the year with your students, are you taking some time now to have them advocate for themselves and own their learning? Because the first part of the year, you've kind of set the model. Now it's time for you to shift some of the ownership onto them so they can own their learning and self-advocate for themselves and become lovers of learning. Acknowledge and celebrate those achievements with your students overall. So we're looking at personal growth and self-reflection. You want to engage in regular self-reflection. You want to set professional development goals. You want to embrace adaptability and flexibility. You want to foster independence. And then in the end, you want to celebrate those things that have happened. So as you set those goals, celebrate the accomplishments of your meeting your goal halfway or meeting your goal 100%, and then set new goals. You want to make sure that you set realistic and measurable goals that contribute to the overall well-being and development of your students with disabilities in your classroom and your own personal growth as you continue to foster that inclusive environment to meet the needs of all of your learners. So that is it for my educators. Those are the instructional strategies and self-growth and personal growth goals that I've given you. What I want you to do is take those goals and maybe set 3 goals for yourself for this year for you to accomplish based on those backgrounds and those goals and context, instructional strategies and self-reflection and personal growth strategies. Just marinate, self-reflect, assess how you're doing, and then what goals can I set for myself to be a better teacher and enhance my teachership as I move forward in my profession. Now it's time for my essential tips and my goals for my leaders. So I'm going to do the same thing just like I did with my educators. I'm going to give you a list of some goals and some things in context, some ideas in context. And based on this, I want you to take this information based on what I'm providing for professional development, instructional leadership, school culture, and communication, and come up with a goal for each one of them of what you want to attain in your building. For leaders and principals, supporting teachers and parents of students with disabilities and special needs, it is essential for you to create an inclusive and effective learning environment. So here's some proposed goals. First thing we want to look at is professional development initiatives. How are we implementing professional development that's focused on special education strategies and inclusive teaching practices and the use of assistive technology for our students with disabilities? And not only special education, but we're looking at our students who require intervention plans and those students who have Section 504 services. So what professional development do you have in place or have planned for your building and for your teachers to implement those programs to help build their efficacy? The second thing is your resource allocation. How are you going to evaluate and ensure adequate allocation of resources, including the staffing, materials, technology, to support the needs of students with disabilities and exceptionalities in your classroom as we set your goals or as you set your goals for this year? How are you going to observe and provide feedback focus on inclusive special education and student with disability inclusion equitable practices? How are you going to provide that constructive feedback and support teachers to improve their skills and teaching strategies to cater to diverse learners and students with disabilities? So how are you going to provide that feedback to determine how they need to grow and shift in their teachership? And then how are you going to use professional learning communities? Are you going to use PLCs? And if so, how are you going to use those PLCs to facilitate the formation of PLC focused on inclusive education, students with disabilities, and options and times where teachers can work together with special education teachers, case managers, 504 coordinators to collaborate and share best practices and discuss those challenges. So how are you going to incorporate that time within your day as you set your goals? Evaluation and recognition. Establish a system for evaluating and recognizing the efforts of teachers who excel in supporting students with disabilities. This could be how you're going to recognize them. Are you going to recognize them through a newsletter, through awards, to public acknowledgement, to professional development opportunities? So as you're looking at how you're going to develop your teachers and your staff, how are you going to recognize those who are doing a good job and give them a pat on the back to intrinsically motivate or to outwardly motivate them to continue the good work and share that motivation and that experience with others? And then what wellness programs or resources are you going to have for your staff and your teachers? You're going to recognize those unique challenges they may face when you're working with students with exceptionalities, those teachers, and then you're going to how are you going to prioritize their mental health and emotional being of being in the classroom every day with students with disabilities or working with students with exceptionalities, and then making sure that you provide the resources for them to continue and you fill up their bucket so they can continue to fill up their students. Thinking about those things as you look into the new year, I'm going to go through it one more time. So professional development, implementing professional development for your teachers, having the resources, conducting observations and providing feedback, using PLCs, professional learning communities, to share best practices, evaluating and recognizing those teachers, and then implementing wellness to ensure that they are healthy and that their emotional, mental, and well-being is in fact in shape and supported so they can go in and teach our students and provide their 100% teaching strategies and 100% best selves to support students. When we look at instructional leadership and what goals you're going to set, I have two for you. First one is making those data-driven decisions. So using data to inform decision-making practices. And then how are you going to use that data and review that data? How often are you going to review the data to adjust and support strategies based on that analysis to support students? Then you want to implement mechanisms for gathering feedback from teachers, parents, and students. And then how are you going to use that feedback to effectively drive and improve programs for students with disabilities and support services? So using that feedback for improvements, how are you going to leverage that feedback from your teachers, parents, and students to determine what changes and improvements I need to make in my instructional leadership to support them and support the data-driven decision-making. Instructional leadership, we have a data-driven decision-making for my leaders, and then mechanisms for gathering that feedback to improve your programs. For school culture and communication for my leaders, we want to make sure that you establish and continue to establish those open lines of communication for all leaders, teachers, and parents. Schedule regular meetings to discuss concerns and share updates and collaborate on support strategies. Number two, you want to advocate for inclusive practices throughout your building and promote those and practices throughout your whole school. You want to make sure all your teachers are trained and equipped to meet the needs of all students who are diverse learners or students with exceptionalities. Make sure that you have your family engagement programs, that you look at those programs, you develop those programs, you revamp those programs, you revive those programs to make sure that you're actively involving parents in their child's education and providing resources, workshops, and support groups tailored to those students with special needs and exceptionalities. How are your community partnerships going? Are you establishing partnerships, and are you going to establish any new partnerships with any local organizations or support services or professionals to enhance the support network for students with exceptionalities and their families? How are you working with your communities to engage and work through those family engagement programs? And then overall, how are you providing a supportive school culture? How, uh, as a leader, are you fostering a school culture that values diversity, inclusivity, and promotes a supportive atmosphere for teachers, staff, students, families, and respect everyone's individual differences and appreciate everyone's individual differences? So in that school culture and communication, we want to look at regular communication, advocacy for inclusive practices, family engagement programs, community partnerships, and then having that supportive school culture. So looking under that umbrella, what type of goals can you make for yourself as a leader? The last section is accessibility and compliance. When you're looking at your building and as you are setting goals, how is your school building set up to support diverse learners' physical needs and their emotional and social needs? And then do you have compliant practices? Make sure that you're conducting accessibility audits of your school facilities to ensure that students are physically and technologically accessible for all students with disabilities. So how are the modifications and accommodations being implemented for students with disabilities and those diverse learners? And then how is that building? Is your building accessible to meet those students' physical needs, to meet their technological needs, to meet their social needs, their emotional needs? So making sure that your building has that appropriate accessibility for all students. And then with that, you want to make sure that your building is accessible and that you are following compliant practices, that the teachers are following all legal requirements related to students with disabilities under the Office of Civil Rights or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and then making sure that you review and update your policies to align with those current regulations, whether you're soliciting support from your district personnel or doing the practices and reviewing the practices yourself. How is your building accessible? Making sure that it is an inclusive environment, and then how are you staying compliant with those laws related to working with students with disabilities? As a leader, by focusing on these goals, leaders and principals can contribute to the creation of an inclusive and supported educational environment for students with disabilities and their families and the educators that are working with those students. And with all those goals and suggestions or recommendations, I recommend that leaders you create or develop maybe 3 goals for this year and come back and align those goals with some starting points, some midpoints, and some endpoints to decide how you want to implement those goals for your year. I mentioned myself in goals when I talked about goals and resolutions, and I do have some goals for Edufaith for 2024. And here are my goals. Well, the first goal is I'm presenting 2 books at the Conference for Exceptional Children this year. I've already mentioned that in Essential News, and that is such a blessing. I'm really excited about that. This year, Edufaith is going to be getting a Facebook page. I want you to join me and make sure that you search for me on Facebook. And my name is Dr. Nakia Simmons, CTTN on Facebook. Edufaith now has a monthly newsletter and a blog. I mentioned it early when I mentioned the dates to remember for February. I want to make sure that I am enhancing my communication and making sure that I am reaching out and providing additional resources and information to my listeners and to my supporters. So what I've decided to do is create a monthly newsletter with a summary of valuable information, essential tips for families, leaders, and educators, the dates to remember, and all types of valuable information about my book. And this year, Edufaith is also developing a blog. So I have a blog. Please feel free, and I want to encourage you to go to www.edufaithconsulting.com and subscribe so you can receive the monthly newsletter. I've already pushed out January. And then you can also keep up with the blog. And with the blog, you can actually communicate back to me. and ask questions through the blog. So please join edufaithconsulting.com, subscribe to the page, and you will be able to access the newsletter and the blog. So those are some of my goals for 2024. And then I will continue with the podcast, presenting those once a month, and make sure that you subscribe to the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page so you can stay abreast on the information and videos and updates there. For now, I want to thank you for all that you've done to contribute and support my family, my friends, and all you out there, Edufaith listeners. Thank you for all that you've done to contribute and support Edufaith, and subscribe so you can be a part of the newsletter, the blog, and follow me and look for me on Facebook as well on the new page that I have. When we're looking at our book excerpt for today, in all of my books, I provide essential tips, and my essential tips are all for my parents. Essential tips are on chapter 9, and those are some essential tips and goals that parents you can go and look into. So get you a copy of Essential Tips for Parents. Check out chapter 9, where I provide those essential tips for parents. And some of them are similar to the ones that I mentioned here, but I have some additional ones in the book as well. When you're looking at Essential Tips for Educators, chapter 9, I have essential tips there. So grab you a copy of the Essential Tips for Educators book. Look in chapter 9. And once again, it's some of the same, but I actually have more in the book. So check out chapter 9 of Essential Tips books. And then Essential Tips for Leaders and Coordinators. Leaders chapter 13 talks about essential tips. Chapter 3, Essential Leaders, chapter 6 through 9, all have essential tips for leaders. And in those chapters, I discuss relationships, confidence, resilience, team building, and leading with your heart. And then essential tips for coordinators throughout that book as well. I have some essential tips for coordinators in that book. So check out any of the essential tips books that align with your needs, or grab a copy of all of them. You can go to www.amazon.com, search up Dr. Cotton and Essential Tips, and grab you a copy and get essential. I will have the links to the books on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page. So you can also go to the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, subscribe there, or if you subscribe to the website, that information will be there as well. So let's get essential. Word of wisdom for today is about setting goals. Setting goals is the first step in turning the invisible into visible. And that is from Anthony Robbins. So I love that. So instead of resolutions, let's look at goals. Let's set 3 goals for the year based on the content I provided for you. And let's turn those goals into visible, actionable items that we can maintain and that motivate us to be better than we were last year.
You've got mail.
Now it's time for our essential advice. Ask Dr. Nakia, or share an inspirational story. I want to use this platform to support and spotlight fellow educators, families, and community members. If you have a question, want advice, or to share a wonderful inspirational story on this podcast, feel free to email me at edufaithforall@gmail.com. That is EDUFAITH, the number 4ALL@gmail.com. May read your letter, provide advice, or share your story on this podcast. Disclaimer: all listeners should adhere to district policies, follow protocols, remain ethical, and adhere to guidelines in the best interest of children. Edufaith Essentials does not assume responsibility or is legally responsible for anyone's actions based on information provided on this podcast. I want to encourage you to get essential. Go to www.edufaithconsulting.com to see what Edufaith Educational Services has to offer. I have valuable resources, information, and a blog that you can subscribe to and find out more essential tips and resources. Go to www.edufaithconsulting.com and subscribe to the Edufaith Educational Services page. Get essential. This podcast is brought to you by Edufaith Educational Services. Some services offered through Edufaith Consulting include consulting and advocacy for parents, consulting for educators, leaders, and school districts, college accommodation advocacy, consulting and training, advocacy in supporting individuals with college accommodations at the post-secondary level, as well as university trainings to support individuals with disabilities and services, parent education trainings, college and career coaching for students who are entering the workforce or the post-secondary college setting, business and district professional development and trainings, for churches, nonprofits, businesses, districts, and communities, specializing in services for diverse learners, including students with disabilities, interventions under the multi-tier system of support, English speakers of other languages, education and leadership coaching, program development under services under IDEA, Section 504, trainings, diverse learners, and essential tips books. Feel free to go to www.edufaithconsulting.com to view all the services that Edufaith Educational Services. I want to encourage my believers to be blessed, all others be kind, be well, and be the change. Follow Edufaith on social media, Twitter, EduFaithS, on Instagram, Edufaith 2021, on LinkedIn, Edufaith Educational Services. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting Edufaith Educational Services and the Edufaith Essentials podcast. Subscribe and follow Edufaith Essentials on the Edufaith Essentials YouTube page, and listen to the Edufaith Essentials podcast on all streaming platforms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Have a wonderful day and get essential.